Award-winning author, Eileen Sheehan, would like to share with you the first few chapters of her paranormal romance thriller, Secrets Untold.
Chapter 1. The tiger did not like the smell of blood. Julia Pace could tell this the moment that she stepped into the holding corridor. The air had shifted. It was metallic, sharp, and wrong. It slid down her throat and settled behind her eyes as a familiar warning that she had learned to respect long ago. "Easy, Kira," she murmured while keeping her voice low and steady as she approached the reinforced enclosure gate. "It's just a scrape. You've had worse." But it didn't seem like Kira agreed. The Siberian tiger paced the length of the enclosure with her tail lashing and her massive shoulders rolling beneath her striped coat. A fresh gash marred her flank. It was likely from a botched jump during enrichment earlier that morning. Blood streaked her fur in dark, drying lines. Julia curled her fingers inside of her work gloves and forced her breathing to slow. "You're fine, she's fine. Don't spike, don't slip," she thought. Behind her, the observation window slid open with a soft mechanical whine. "Julia?" a voice called. "Are you good in there?" She didn't turn around as she said, "That depends on how you define good, Mark." Mark Henderson, the senior veterinary tech and a chronic worrier, leaned halfway into the corridor. "She's agitated," he warned. "We can sedate her if—" "No," Julia said with a tone that was sharper than intended. She exhaled and made a point of softening her tone as she continued with, "She just needs calm. Sedation stresses her out more." Mark hesitated as he asked, "Are you sure? That cut looks nasty." "I'm sure," she replied, as she stepped closer to the gate and lowered herself to a crouch so that she wasn't looming over the agitated feline. "Hey, beautiful," she whispered. "I know it hurts, I know." Kira's amber eyes locked onto Julia. The pacing slowed and one massive paw lifted and then carefully set back down. Julia felt the subtle, disturbing shift inside her body. Her heartbeat deepened, slowed, and then synced. Her senses sharpened until the world felt too loud and too bright. She could hear Kira's breathing, the soft rasp of her tongue against her teeth, and the scrape of her claws on concrete. And beneath it all was the itch. It started in her hands. Julia flexed her fingers again with her nails pressing into abnormally thick latex gloves. The urge crawled under her skin while whispering, "Change, change, change," in a voice that was not quite her own. No, she fiercely thought, not here, not now. She pressed her gloved palm to the cool steel of the enclosure gate and grounded herself with the chill from the concrete that permeated the latex. "Julia," Mark said again, but in a voice that was quieter now, "Your nose is bleeding." She automatically lifted a hand and wiped beneath her nostril. When she looked at her glove, there was red smeared across the pale blue latex. "Damn it," she muttered. It was a stress response, and always the first sign of her struggle to hold the beast within her at bay. "I'm fine," she lied. "Just give me a minute." Mark didn't move as he said, "You've been pulling doubles all week. If you need to tap out—" "I don't," she briskly insisted, as she slowly straightened while carefully keeping her movements smooth. Abrupt gestures could not only set Kira off, but they might set her off too. "I've got this." Kira growled low in her chest. It was a warning rumble that vibrated through the corridor walls. Julia swallowed as her mind echoed the word focus. She reached for the intercom switch that was mounted beside the gate and said in what she hoped was a calming voice, "Okay, sweetheart, we're going to take a look at that cut. No tricks, no cages, just me." Even as her bones ached with the wrongness of staying human, her voice was steady. She was proud of that. The secondary door slid open with a hiss. Kira paused, with her massive head swinging toward the opening. Her ears flicked forward. She was both curious and wary as Julia cautiously stepped inside. The scent of blood, fur, and Kira's body heat immediately attacked her senses. Her pupils dilated against her will, and the world sharpened with its edges too clean and too real. "No, no, no," her mind cried. She forced herself to kneel in order to present less of a threat while Kira slowly approached. Each step was deliberate. Julia resisted the instinct to bare her teeth in reassurance. "Don't mirror," her mind warned. "Don't answer the call." "You're okay," Julia whispered. "You're safe, I promise." When Kira huffed, her warm breath washed over Julia's face. The tiger's injured flank was closer now, with the wound sluggishly oozing. Julia's hand shook as she reached out. It was just for a second, but Kira noticed and snarled. It was a sudden, explosive sound that rattled Julia's ribs. Instinct slammed into her like a wave. Her vision tunneled, her spine burned, and her fingers spasmed. Inside the glove, her nails lengthened. It was just a fraction, but still enough to tear the latex. "Stop," her mind ordered, while clenching her fists so hard that her knuckles screamed. "I'm okay," she said aloud. Whether she was speaking to Kira or herself, she didn't know. "It's okay." Behind the observation glass, Mark swore, "Julia, I don't like this." "I said I've got it," she snapped with open irritation. This caused Kira's ears to flatten. The tiger took a step back with her muscles bunching. Julia felt herself slipping. Her thin line that balanced the control between the beast and humanity was fading. The part of her that knew how to be a woman in a concrete box full of rules and locks was losing ground to something primal. And now, predator recognized predator. She closed her eyes. "Count," she told herself. "Count and breathe. 1, 2, 3. Her heartbeat slowed. The burn in her spine eased and her nails retracted, leaving her skin stinging as it knit back into place. When she opened her eyes again, Kira was still watching her, but the tension had bled from her stance. Julia shakily exhaled and reached for the antiseptic spray and applied it to the wound. Her voice was rough as she murmured, "There you go, good girl." Minutes later, it was done. The wound was cleaned and treated, and the 300-pound tiger lay down with a disgruntled chuff while looking at her side. Julia slowly backed out with her muscles trembling from exhaustion. When the door sealed behind her with a solid clang, she leaned against the wall and slid down until she was sitting on the cold concrete floor, her head tipped back and her eyes closed. Mark was beside her in seconds. "Jesus, Jules," he worriedly said, "you scared the hell out of me." She weakly laughed. "Join the club." He crouched in front of her while frowning and asked, "Are you sure you're okay? That wasn't just stress." She met his gaze and forced a smile as she insisted, "It's an occupational hazard." Mark didn't look convinced, but he let it go. He always did. Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Julia looked to see a man, who she considered good-looking but didn't recognize, standing at the end of the wide corridor. His hands were casually hooked in his belt, and he wore a forest green uniform that was crisp and belonging to a game warden. He was tall, broad-shouldered, quite handsome, and watching her with quiet intensity. Their eyes met, and something in her chest experienced an unfamiliar and unsettling twist. The man stepped closer as he said, "Julia Pace?" As she pushed herself to her feet, she was suddenly aware of the blood on her glove, the sweat at her temples, and the way that her pulse still hadn't fully settled. "That's me," she said. "Can I help you?" His smile was warm with approval. "Oliver Dickens," he said while extending a hand, "Game and Wildlife. I was hoping to ask you a few questions." Julia stared at his hand for a beat too long before removing her glove and taking it. The moment their skin touched, her senses flared, and somewhere, deep inside of her, the cat stirred. "He comes with danger," it whispered, "attractive pheromones." Julia didn't know which alarmed her more. Chapter 2.
Stop!
Julia hated how much she noticed the way that Oliver Dickens' handshake was firm but not aggressive. It was warm, very human. "You're bleeding," he said while nodding toward the glove that she held in her hand. She pulled her hand back from his grip almost too quickly as she blurted out, "Occupational hazard." "Mark didn't mention that part in his incident report," Oliver mildly replied. Mark shot him a look as he snapped, "Because it wasn't an incident." Julia peeled the other glove off and stuffed them into the biohazard bin while forcing her shoulders to relax. "The tiger was stressed," she steadily said. "She's fine now." "And that made your nose bleed?" Oliver asked with genuine curiosity. "It bleeds when I'm overly tense," she admitted. "I was in that cage with an injured 300-pound tiger." "Why didn't you sedate it?" Oliver asked in a way that didn't sound judgmental, just curious. "I don't like to do that unless it's absolutely necessary," she informed him. "In this case, it wasn't." "You're a woman of courage," she said with admiration. "I guess," she replied with a shrug. Oliver studied her face instead of the enclosure. His gaze lingered in a way that felt too observant and too steady. She'd learned to read people the way that she read animals. This man noticed things and then filed them away. That made him dangerous to spend too much time around. Still, Oliver said, most handlers don't end up with their nose bleeding while patching up a cat. Julia lifted a shoulder as she said, most unsedated and injured cats don't weigh 300 pounds. A corner of his mouth curved into something that came close to resembling a smile as he said, fair enough. Mark cleared his throat as he said, if you're done interrogating our staff warden, I've got meds to log. Oliver nodded as he said, I'll just borrow Julia for a minute. Julia started. Mark was already backing away. Traitor. 5 minutes, Oliver promised. She followed him down the corridor with every step measured. Her body was still humming with leftover adrenaline, and her nerves were buzzing like a live wire beneath her skin. They stopped near a quieter service hallway. There were concrete walls with no animals and no witnesses. Oliver leaned back against the wall with his arms loosely crossed as he asked, do you always handle the big cats? Yes, she stiffly replied. By yourself, he continued. Usually, she said with a shrug. That's uncommon, he mused. So I've been told, she muttered. He watched her for another beat and then said, have you ever considered transferring to a safer department? No, she practically hissed with indignation. Oliver raised an eyebrow as he said, I didn't think so. Silence stretched. Julia felt it pressing against her ribs while threatening to expose things best left buried. Why are you really here? She asked. His expression sobered as he said, we've been tracking an uptick in illegal animal movement along the eastern corridor. Exotic cats, tigers, lions, even rumors of rarer acquisitions. Her stomach tightened. And you think that involves the zoo? She asked. I think the zoo is a potential target, Oliver informed her. And you, his gaze flicked back to the enclosure corridor, are a potential complication. She crossed her arms as she asked, meaning? Meaning someone like you is either a liability or an asset to the black market merchants, he explained. Julia smiled tightly as she said, I assure you I'm very boring. His eyes didn't leave her face as he said with a tone that had a hint of intimacy in it, I don't believe that for a second. Before she could respond, a shrill clang echoed from the opposite wing. It was metal striking metal. Julia flinched hard enough that Oliver noticed. Her pulse spiked as her mind roared, not now. She swallowed hard before saying, if that's all, I really need to go. Are you okay? Oliver asked. I'm fine, she insisted. You say that a lot, he noted. Because I mean it, she replied. It was a lie. She was very good at those. Oliver straightened and said, look, I won't take more of your time, but if you notice anything strange, like any unusual inquiries, missing inventory, or people asking questions, please call me. As he handed her a card, their fingers brushed. This time, the reaction wasn't that twisting inside of her. It was awareness. Her senses were sharpened. Her heartbeat shifted and settled into something slower and deeper. It was Predator recognizing something else. She pulled her hand away and slipped the card into her pocket without looking at it. I will, she said, if I notice anything. I hope you don't, Oliver replied. But if you do, I hope you call. He hesitated, then added with a softer tone, and for what it's worth, you handled that tiger beautifully. Julia forced herself to nod. When he walked away, she stood there long after his footsteps faded. That night, Julia dreamed of claws. It was something that she did often. In the dream, she was 8 years old again and crouched in the backyard of her childhood home. The grass was wet and the moon was far too bright. Her hands burned like they were on fire. She remembered screaming in her mother's voice that was crisp with terror as she yelled, Julia, don't look at yourself. She remembered the sound of bones snapping into shapes that human hands were never meant to take. She woke with a gasp. The sheets were twisted around her legs and her heart was pounding against her rib cage. The apartment was dark and quiet, as was the building. She had no immediate neighbors. She'd chosen it that way. Julia swung her feet onto the floor and pressed her palms against the wood as a means of grounding herself in the present, while thinking I'm 26 years old, alone, still human, mostly. She moved to the bathroom and turned on the light. Her reflection of pale skin, dark hair pulled into a messy knot, and rich blue eyes that were too bright for someone who barely slept stared back at her. She leaned closer while examining her hands. No claws. She flexed her fingers anyway while feeling the echo of something sharp and ready beneath the surface. Control, she whispered to herself, always control. That had been the rule. It was the only one that mattered. And she hadn't always been good at it. At 13, she'd shifted during a school lockdown drill with panic overwhelming restraint, and the family was forced to move. At 17, she'd woken in the woods 3 miles from home, covered in blood that wasn't hers. At 21, she'd had to leave a job after a coworker caught her eyes changing shape under stress, and too many questions arose. Each time she ran. Each time she erased herself. The zoo was the longest that she'd ever stayed in one place, because animals didn't ask questions, because predators understood boundaries, because cages made sense to her. Julia pressed her forehead to the mirror. You can't want him, she told herself. Oliver Dickens was observant, persistent, and kind. These were all the things that got people hurt. Her phone buzzed on the counter. The caller was an unknown number. She stared at it until it stopped. Then it buzzed again. She held the phone to her ear but said nothing. Hi, Oliver's voice said. It was warm and entirely too familiar. Sorry, I hope this isn't too late to call. Her jaw tightened as she said, You gave me your card less than 6 hours ago. I'm efficient, he chuckled. She should hang up. That would be the wise thing to do, but she didn't. What do you want, warden? She bluntly asked. There was a pause and then a faint smile in his voice as he replied with, Dinner, not an interrogation, just dinner. Julia closed her eyes. Anxiety curled through her chest. It was not the sharp, violent kind. It was the hazardous kind that made her want to say yes. I don't do dinner, she finally said. Coffee? He persisted. No, she grumbled. Not ready to give up, he asked. A walk? Definitely not, she practically screeched. Oliver chuckled as he said, You're terrible at this. I warned you I'm boring, she replied. I don't believe that, he said again, only quieter now. How about tomorrow, noon, 10 minutes? If you hate it, I'll never bother you again. Silence stretched between them. 10 minutes was nothing. 10 minutes was how long it took to lose control. She could do 10 minutes. Fine, she finally said, 10 minutes. Deal, Oliver replied. Sleep well, Julia. The line went dead. She stood there in the bathroom with the phone pressed to her ear, and her heart pounding like she'd just outrun something intense and hungry. Under the wrong moon, under the wrong pressure, she knew exactly how risky 10 minutes could be. But it wasn't the wrong moon, and he wasn't putting her under that kind of pressure. Even so, she was already bracing for the cost of spending time with him.
I hope you enjoyed chapters 1 and 2 of Secrets Untold by Eileen Sheehan. The entire story can be obtained in ebook, print, or audio from your favorite bookseller.